Hello, and welcome to Group Chat. My name is Chris Ryan. I am joined by Paolo Uggetti.
What's up?
Justin Verrier.
Hi, Chris.
It's raining in Southern California, and it's raining gossip in San Antonio, Texas.
Love it.
We begin with a report from Woj on ESPN that the Spurs had a players-only meeting in which they, quote, implored Kawhi Leonard.
Great word, by the way.
To come back. This comes couple days after. The chronology of the reporting coming out of San Antonio has been pretty interesting because a couple days ago, there was some Manu quotes about, kind of defeated sounding of just like he's not coming back. Kawhi Leonard is not coming back. He's been nursing this quad injury. There have been stories all year. First, there was the stories about tension with Kawhi and the Spurs. Then there was some stuff with Kawhi and Jumpman and how he wanted a bigger deal from them. It's been more or less confirmed that medically Kawhi has been cleared by the Spurs, but that he has his own team, and even Pop said this a couple days ago, like his guys who are looking at his quad, who are kind of evaluating his quad and whether or not it's pain or whether or not there's actually still something medically wrong. We don't know. But we had the Manu quote, which was just kind of like this somber, Kawhi's not coming back, the Cavalry's not coming, and that apparently was. Today we have a report that they had a players-only meeting where they implored Kawhi to buck up and come through. Moments after this Woj report comes out, several members of the Spurs started tweeting that it was BS. Brandon Paul did a little satire of it, and Danny Green was like, it couldn't be further from the truth.
Both well done
LOL.
in their own
LOL.
different way.
Yeah. And so this is interesting on a lot of different levels. One, the immediacy with which these guys hit up Twitter to dispute this story, which just goes to show that everybody's kind of addicted to social media and immediately knows when there's been sources say story written about their team. Two, the pushback, which is something that the Spurs had not done a lot of this year. They have allowed this story to kind of fester. Popovich gave that post-practice interview where he was just like, we got to know who we're going to be with. We got to know who we're going to run out there. What do you think of this story, man? It's so strange.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the whole idea that we've been talking about throughout, kind of tracking this, just like how different this is for the Spurs.
Yeah.
But this one in particular almost feels like there's a different arena happening outside of the day-to-day of a team and the media interaction there. There's almost like a Woj zone now where it's like things are true and someone said them, but we don't know where they're coming from because they're all anonymously sourced.
Yes.
And now you almost have a pushback from the other side. So there's these warring factions, and I think for us who kind of sit back and watch it all play out, I'm just confused.
Yeah.
I just really want to know what's going on here. And for someone, perhaps on the Spurs side of things, to basically just come out and say, this is how it actually is, and this is what we're going to do going forward.
Yeah, Pop's been relatively quiet. RC's been relatively quiet about it. I don't know if RC Buford's commented on it at all. And one thing you have to ask yourself, Paolo, when you see these stories is, what's the end game? Right? What are they trying? What are the various parties here trying to accomplish?
I think, to be honest, if it's, we can't know where it's coming from, right? The sources, but I think the goal probably is just to get Kawhi back on the court. I think that there's probably a contingent with the Spurs that is just we've cleared this guy. There's got to be pent up frustration by now of when is he coming on the court? We had that report too where it's oh, he's coming Thursday against Pelicans,
last
right?
week. It was
last week. And then nothing. So I think if there is any end game at all that we can kind of parse through all these reports and details is that people want Kawhi on the court. And maybe there's just kind of butting heads about how to go about that or how different people feel passionately about whether he should or shouldn't come back. But I think it seems like that's the end game here. And at the same time, I'm just I think it's hilarious that, of course, this is the season we're talking about the Spurs the most. And it's because of an entire, it just happened to be that way.
Yeah, we're not used to seeing a Spurs team with a relatively mediocre record. And this was a team that I think was specifically built because they liked what they saw in the Western Conference Finals in the 3 quarters that Kawhi played against the Warriors. And they were we like our chances with our best guys healthy. And so they did, Manu came back, and they do have an older team that was sort of built to compete in the playoffs, I think, even though now in retrospect you have to wonder whether or not, especially with the rise of Houston, if they could have really competed with those two teams. but we'll probably never know.
Yeah, they were probably trying to tank is what happened. I do think it's interesting that even in the week or two since we last talked about this, it seems like they've made enough of a step forward to at least stay out of like the fray, like underneath the A seed. I think it's really impressive.
LaMarcus is on a roll. Like,
Yeah.
if you look at his, I think over the last 6 games, he scored like 25, 37, 33, 30. Like, I think he had 27 last night. He's just been on fire. And like, that's kind of what they needed, because that would be Kawhi providing that kind of production and LaMarcus being like a second banana. But now it's like, okay, they're having a tough schedule and they're beating these teams like the Wizards last night. So it's working out for them in the sense of staying in the playoff race and not being on the fringes.
Right. While the Nuggets flub like their best chance at doing this, as the Clippers just kind of can't really get over the hump there. A team that's like Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge and Tony Parker claiming he wants to play 3 more years.
And Kyle Anderson playing for a contract and a bunch of guys.
Verrier.
Yeah.
They're 6 right now.
Yeah.
And I know it's just like a complete car wreck in the middle of the West right now, but that's saying something. They're ahead of the Wolves.
I guess my big question is this about the Spurs medical team or is it about Kawhi? Is Kawhi essentially... So my question is would this still be the case if Kawhi was on the Lakers? Is there something here that is a hidden sort of protest about playing for the Spurs for some reason? Or is it literally just Kawhi is like, this is a bad injury and I'm still not over it and you guys want me to come back, and just because it says the quad is healed, it doesn't feel like it's healed, and I don't know. I'm not ready. The strangest thing about this is if there is any team, any franchise who I think has played it relatively safe with their guys and said, hey, okay, so you're out for the season. And the Spurs haven't done that with Kawhi, and Kawhi hasn't come out and said, I'm not going to play this year.
Right. I think we don't know is the best way we can answer that, but I do think we have more of a track record with this franchise than anyone else, and it points to the institution and all the various parts. Their medical staff and their sports science staff is at the forefront of the league, and they've been that way for years, almost decades. And when we have Kawhi, we actually didn't know much about him. We knew that he played basketball really well. We knew he was a fringe MVP candidate, but we really didn't know this guy on a personal level. We kind of defaulted to the fact that he was a robot and he just doesn't say anything funny. And now it's almost maybe we're hearing more about him, or maybe more specifically more about like the people closest to him who are talking for him.
I just think the most surprised, like I'm echoing you guys, but essentially like we know that the Spurs this is like a coach that purposefully rests guys just in the middle of the season, national TV games. So that like the absence of rest, or the fact that they want to get him back from essentially resting and playing out his injury off the court is just so shocking that I don't even know what to do.
Yeah, and then you also have Kawhi a couple weeks ago saying, I want to be a Spur for life. So the
I will say about that.
They can't put this story to bed, and that's the hardest part, is neither side seems to be able to put this story to bed. The Spurs can't just leave. Like, the Spurs could end it by saying he's not going to come back this season. But instead they're like, we have to play with who we've got. It's like a weird lack of definitive statements that I think is
they're like
what's affecting.
subtweeting each other back and forth.
A little bit.
Yeah, and Kawhi saying that like he's a Spur for life, I almost roll my eyes at that immediately, just because that's the type of like blanket statement that someone's going to say in response to all these things happening, and which is leading me to almost question the Brandon Pauls and the Danny Greens, because they're more likely to toe the party line, whereas like the anonymous sources at least will speak truth. Just under the veil of just like having anonymity. So it's a mess. I just want to know what's happening.
All right, guys. So last night the Cavaliers beat the Raptors 132-129, and it made me – there was something Larry Drew said that kind of prompted me to think about these ideas of some pre-playoff questions we have for these teams. Larry Drew, he's got his moment here because Ty Lue is away from the team for medical reasons. Larry Drew said, I always say there is one game during the season that changes your team. That game can be early, it can be midway, it can be late, but there's one game that kind of changes your team, the mindset, and I really believe that tonight's game might have done that for us. Coming off a 35-17 game, LeBron James responded, turn around the season, we've only got like 11 more games left. So
That's just perfect.
Maybe seeing why Larry Drew is not necessarily the head coach of this team, but did you see anything from Cleveland last night as we approach the postseason that made you think they turned the corner?
I mean, it's kind of exactly what you would want from a Cleveland team, kind of like flipping the switch here in the second half and maybe going into the playoffs. I think for me, the biggest takeaway was that I almost forgot Kevin Love existed. And when we were doing all these analysis of all these teams going into the playoffs and, the East is a mess, you almost forgot that he was going to come back and provide a dynamic that like they just didn't have before. Like LeBron can make a lot of nothing, right? But the fact that he has a clear-cut second banana, I mean, I think it means a big deal for this team.
That was a big thing that I noticed last night was that Kevin Love never got a chance really to play the plan B. When he went down, he sort of had a good part of the opening season. Had a good opening part of the season. Isaiah Thomas came back, his numbers cratered, and then he broke his hand. And so he never got to just play the second option on this offense. And then last night, I was just noticing, first of all, just a great game from him. But second of all, he knows what to do in relationship to LeBron on the floor. Like when he can tell based on certain things that LeBron's doing, whether LeBron's going to shoot or want to pass. And you could see his movement through the lane or backing up and getting into position to shoot, that there was just a familiarity with LeBron that all these 5 other guys who just arrived don't have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but Juliet and I have been on Kevin Love Corner for a while now, whether it's been through his social media or on the court. But I think you're right. Like, in a weird way, he's become the guy that LeBron has to rely on and that he has the most confidence
he was
on.
Supposed to be when they traded Wiggins for him.
Exactly, and now he has to have the most confidence in them because he's the one who's been there the longest, essentially. Like, I guess if you want to count like J.R. Smith, but, you know, he's the guy who is going to be there in the corner in that perfect spot for LeBron to kick it out, and he's going to hit the three most of the time. So I think he's changing the dynamic of the team altogether, which is making them this good. But at the same time, I think it all kind of goes back to LeBron, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this. But these are the type of games that make you believe in the Cavs, even though when everything else is telling you not to.
We were
believe
in a
them.
bar last night. A bunch of us were watching, and it was like, you just don't bet against LeBron in the playoffs.
Right.
Like, this is a really good example of not betting against LeBron James in the playoffs. And it was, last 20 games, he's averaged a triple-double, 30.5 points on 55% shooting, 40 from 3, 10.5 boards, and 10.5 assists per night in the last 20 games.
It's insane.
It's
Yeah, he played 39 minutes last night. He does not look at all like he's slowing down. He was responsible for 80 points he either scored or assisted on last night. The guy is this team right now, and I kept waiting for him to dip. I kept waiting for him to need a week off. I kept waiting for a weird ankle injury that was hobbling him, and it seems like he's getting stronger and stronger as the season goes on. If James Harden wasn't having one of the great offensive seasons in the history of basketball, you could make the argument that LeBron's like pushing his way back into the MVP race. But now, I guess the question I have is that, yeah, they won last night. They still gave up 129 points. And there were a couple of nights where Solo was tweeting about this. A lot of people were showing, like, their defense still sucks.
It's really bad.
It's bad.
Yeah, they still had to win a track meet, which was still the case when Kyrie was there. I think even at their best, they were going to have to overwhelm a team with offense. And even in the playoffs, it was really like LeBron can beat you, Kyrie can beat you in iso ball, and that's still very important. And I think if you wanted to bet for them in the East, that's still the reason to bet for LeBron. I'm curious if they have enough defensively and if they have the right parts defensively. Because if you say their best 5 is some combination of a front court with Larry Nance, Kevin Love, and LeBron, then who's the 4 in that situation? And if Kevin Love has to chase around the Pascal Siakam, some of the three-point shooters, is that like a weak spot that teams are going to be able to exploit in a way that they couldn't maybe in the playoffs when he was playing more 5?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they were probably hoping that would be set off by George Hill being a better perimeter defender.
Sure.
But I don't know. I mean, like last night, there was a lot of sleeping JR moments. There was a lot of sleeping LeBron moments. There's like one that's like Van Vliet with 11 feet with LeBron just like being like, no. And you know what? Here's the thing, is that maybe the reason why LeBron James is averaging a triple-double in the last 20 games as we at the end of the regular season, and he has played every single game this year, is because some nights he's just like, I'm not running after Fred VanVleet. I'm not just gonna pretend effort merchant this if it's not actually worth it.
He knows how to allocate his resources. Like, he's
Perhaps.
33. Come on, like he's gotta give and take. But I think the one thing I saw last night was like watching the game. I was like kind of impressed by Kevin Love's defense and like effort even, and I was like, that's probably not the best sign, but at least that he's the best defender.
He like recovered on a hedge, and I was like, "Who
yeah,
the fuck is this guy?"
yeah. Exactly.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
it was really good at times.
They were actually pretty thin last night. No Nance, no Hood, no Osman, no Korver, no Thompson. So the theme of the NBA season to me, aside from the Rockets, who have pretty much been a wire-to-wire, juggernaut, is that we just don't know who any of these teams are because of injuries, because of trades, because of getting to know you, because, now Roberson's out, so we don't know who the Thunder are anymore. And now they've flipped over the entire Cavs roster, so we have to figure out who they are. And the Warriors are going through nobody's ever healthy at the same time or in shape at the same time. So, other than the Rockets, one of the reasons why I'm asking these questions is I don't really know who these teams are. Now, the other team besides the Rockets who I think deserve the least amount of questioning is the Raptors.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I was gonna say. Like you were saying, like we don't know what these teams are, and we do know what the Raptors are because they've also been kind of wire to wire in a way, but at the same time, we're just prone to doubt them.
Okay,
we know that they're whiners, is what we know.
Okay, that's. I was gonna ask you if you feel like there is any Raptors freeze up last night. I mean, they just beat the Rockets like a week ago or whatever that game was, and they lost to the Thunder over the weekend. But was there any big stage national game, LeBron on the road? And I know you're like they've been making a big deal about the refs in the last couple weeks. Like almost, I understand it. I understand the chip on the shoulder, but it does feel like they're like, look, we're not getting the respect we deserve. So like, don't expect too much.
Yeah, and I watched that entire Thunder game that they played, I think, on Sunday, and it not only was them on the court, but their like broadcasters were kind of warping everything into them not having respect and making this a sign of like
fake news, fake refs.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit. I mean, that game last night was just a showing of all the good with the Raptors and all the potential downside in the playoffs, just because when they scored, 80 in the first half, we were all like, damn.
Yeah.
Look at Toronto.
This is a wrap.
This is it.
Yeah.
And then they kind of just put up an egg, and they put up, I think, 20 points in that third quarter, and it really speaks to what we all feared about them, where it's like LeBron is the best player on the court, and in the playoffs, it becomes a little reductive and a little more simplistic, and he could just win a game for you.
Yeah, and I was going through the Cavs splits through the year, and I don't have anything like hardcore to report, but it was definitely, their losses are generally they're shooting around 30% from three.
Yeah.
And last night they shot, I think, like 65%.
That's their offense.
Yeah.
Like their
and if they're
shot.
but they're streaky. That's the thing. And if they are hitting, a 20-point lead doesn't matter. Raptors being up 20 in the beginning of the third is not a big deal, And so that's the thing that I think the Raptors need to guard against is complacency. And I also think that last night there was a little bit of them getting out of their stuff. There was a little bit of, okay, give it to DeMar and clear out. Yeah. And I think that one thing that we thought they had kind of turned the page with here was a more elegant offense that limited the usage of Lowry a little bit more, made him more of like a Chris Paul type player. But I saw a lot of like DeMar hoping that he got a call. But that's just going to be it's a risk if you want to play that way down the fourth quarter, although that's the way most NBA teams play in the fourth quarter.
And if you want to play in the playoffs like that, because we're championing their system as being more fluid, but at the same time we know how playoff games work, and we know that at some point they're going to have to give the ball to DeMar and be like, go get us a basket.
Yeah.
So I think it's the whole thing of like who's their alpha, and obviously it's DeMar. It's been kind of clear that way, but at the same time, can he do it in a game like this or in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think in their defense, God forbid that I'm the one defending the Raptors right now.
You the North.
Wow.
Come on.
Sort of Northeast. I think they have enough pieces on that team to potentially counter some of these mistakes that they made in a 7-game series, whereas like in the chess match, maybe they have the advantage simply because they have more interesting pieces.
Yeah, Tim Cato wrote an interesting piece for SB Nation about like the difference between depth and the size of their rotation. Their rotation is inevitably going to shrink, but they do have depth. Right. They do have. It's really cool when in the playoffs a coach can go into the bag and be like, bang! Now I picked right, and this guy had a big night because you weren't ready for Norman Powell to have a 25-point night or something like that. We haven't seen that from Norman Powell in a while. But they do have a lot of options off the bench. I just don't know who the third guy is for them.
Pascal.
You think so?
I don't know. No,
I don't know if you saw Coach Tyler, but he is
yeah.
Puerto.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, guys. I want to talk about some of these hot teams, and are they hot or not? Like how hot is hot? How hot can it get in March?
Is this the Tinderization of the group chat?
Wow. I don't want to go down that path.
I don't want to swipe either way on any of these guys. But look, I want to talk about Portland. Zach Lowe had a big piece about them on ESPN today. And they're reliably the most entertaining team in the league right now. I think that they sort of like encapsulate the coolest parts about modern offense without like winding the clock down and then foul hunting like the Rockets do. Dame and CJ are out of their minds. Aminu, Harkless, and Evan are shooting well. Nurkic is Nurkic again. Do they need a plan C if their backcourt's not firing on all cylinders? And can they rely on Mo, Evan, and Aminu continuing to shoot well?
Their plan C should, but probably is too early to say this, but I will say their plan C should be Zach Collins.
Wow, what a shout.
Well, so it should be Nurkic, right? Because he's the third guy.
Yeah.
But I think Zach Collins is playing better.
Talk to me about Zach Collins.
I don't know. Like I'm gonna try to do my best Jonathan Tjarks impression here because he's obsessed with him. But I mean, he's just so nobody expected him to be this good so far, and he's kind of doing all the little things you want to see from a guy in this first season. But the problem is that they're having to use him more so than they probably even expected. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm all here for.
What's his game like?
I mean, he's just like a stretch. He's a stretch four. He's super athletic, has wingspan, and he's kind of just he's still raw, but he's very much like he can hit the mid range jumper and then also just defend in the way that's disturbing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
To the opposing offense. So I think he's been just a lot of fun to watch.
When I saw Zach Collins in summer league, I was like, Olshey's gonna get fired over this pick.
I think at one point Jimmy Butler was like calling him out from the bench. It was
Really?
like, who is this dude?
Oh yeah. I think that was.
I saw them play against Utah, and Donovan Mitchell like ate his liver like in front of an entire gym at the Thomas and Mack. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it does speak to just like where Nurkic is at this point. He's just kind of like not as consistent as you need him to be if he's your third guy. He just kind of comes and goes, and like especially in that game when he got dunked on by LeBron.
Yeah.
Then just didn't like you couldn't hear from him again in that game.
Yeah.
He just kind of disappeared. So I think Collins is their third guy on offense, but you're kind of otherwise relying on a collective, and I think that's the concern with this team.
Well, this is the sort of thrust of Zach's ESPN piece is the elimination of 2-pointers that they've sort of gone through this season. Is their defense has obviously tightened up a lot, and a lot of that has to do with Nurkic, but that they've essentially turned this into an inside-outside game where people just are bombing away from the arc. I will be really interested to get to the end of the playoffs and see if like we maybe got a little addled on 3-pointers. Like if a team that probably deserved to go a little farther in the postseason wound up hitting a cold streak in a playoff series and losing it because of that. I'll be curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always pushed back slightly on this point just because of the math involved.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But you're right. I think there are going to be some times where we run into potentially a Houston situation like last year where it's like, well, the Spurs defense is completely engineered to force you into the middle where you don't want to go.
Exactly.
And if you know that in advance, like you become predictable at the very least.
Yeah, I don't think that this is going to affect Golden State or Houston or even Cleveland for that matter. But although it could, but it's teams that are just a little bit like, if your regular season stuff starts to sputter a little bit, what do you do to get the baskets you need? That's just curious. I think Portland's going to be dynamite. I mean, like I can't wait to see them in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I've heard some people talk about is just the point guard. Their backcourt is good, but their size, they're not like necessarily big.
Yeah.
So if they come across like maybe like John Wall, well, that would be in the finals, obviously. But just like if they come across like a more athletic, bigger backcourt, that could get them into like out of rhythm. Like
Paolo, they're gonna have to face DeJounte Murray, who is not John
guy.
Wall like in terms of reputation, but he's
Yeah.
a pretty monstrous defender already.
Right.
Yeah, there's a really excellent NBA Reddit video that someone put up where it's CJ and Dame at dinner with Chris Haynes saying no more layups, no more layups. And then just the entire Houston Rockets team just going for layups.
layups?
It's like
That's
at least
amazing.
15 or 20. I'm not joking. It's a fantastic video. But that's what they're facing because the defense has been good this year, but it needs to be on another level in the playoffs, which they haven't shown in the past.
So I feel like Portland has played well enough to sort of elevate themselves into like a different tier of team than the following ones that we're going to talk about. But here's a selection of hot teams, and I just want to know who you trust the most after we kind of get through the end of this. My question about the Sixers is, can they live with Ben Simmons' absentee jumper? I mean, can you win a playoff series if, let's say, I mean, there is no answer for Embiid, but let's say the packing the paint and trying to stop Embiid as much as possible is the defensive philosophy of whoever the Sixers play. What do you do with a guy who can't shoot beyond 14 feet? And can the Sixers just rely on Bellinelli and JJ? get their points.
And Dario.
Big Dario. I mean, it's worked so far. This seems to be the popular just talking point with the Sixers, and I think it's the right one just because this is going to be their like existential question, not only in the playoffs, but like going forward if Fultz doesn't come back or they don't get a guy to fill that, what is it, 4th or 5th chair to spread the floor around them.
Sure.
I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Wait and see. I think, like you mentioned, like what is the counter for Embiid? You look at a lot of these teams, especially in the East. Is there any center?
Yeah, like Miles Turner can't stop him.
Right.
You know.
And so can someone like stop him in the post? And if he flares out to the 3-point line, is he going to hit enough shots in order to make them respectable? It might come down to something like that. Can Embiid just be on the level of LeBron? And then, as we saw in the All-Star game, not the best like indicator of what's going to happen in the playoffs, but like he can hang.
And can he play 35 minutes a night in a series where the games come fast and furious, right?
I think with Simmons, like, yes, it's what everybody loves to say is, the game slows down in the playoffs and then you're going to be forced to hit these mid-range jumpers, which obviously he has not been able to do, or threes for that matter. But it's in terms of like expectations. When I think of the Sixers, I'm like, okay, they're in the playoffs. That's already a win, right? I mean, maybe you can disagree.
Not only are they in the
with me,
playoffs, they're the 4th seed right now.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
JJ's getting those New York Times features about idiosyncrasies. Yeah.
What are we doing?
I can do a feature on you.
Oh wow, I don't know if I'd want that.
You've got some idiosyncrasies though.
Yeah, I do, but I don't know. Like I think that it's already so. It's like okay, if they take whoever they play in the 5th seed, if they play the 4-5 to 6-7 games, and even if it does come down to we can point to losing this series because maybe Ben's shot isn't there, then it's like, okay, that's a point of improvement going forward. And it goes back to finding the next fill-in option. So it's just, it's an expectation thing for me at least.
The strange thing about where they're seated now is that there's a bunch of different there's a bunch of scenarios in which the Sixers are 5th, 6th, or like are 6th or 7th or even 8th, and a first-round exit is fine. It's hard to stomach. For as good as the Pacers have been this season, I expect the Sixers to beat them in the playoffs.
Can we take a Sixers Chris temperature check right now? Like, where are you with them?
You know how like when you have a fever, right? And then so like you have your fever, and then the next day you feel enough better that you're like high on your own recovery, and so you get in the car and go to work, and then like midway to work you're like, oh god, I still have a fever.
Yes.
I'm at oh god, I still have a fever. So I came down a little bit where I was like, it's time to level out and stop slacking so much about Markelle Fultz coming back. And then now I'm just like, they just consistently just like win games, and they win games in a way that they're not streaky. They're just like putting teams down, and they're beating teams that they're supposed to beat. So it's actually rabid. I would say. I think I need a series of shots.
They had the easiest schedule down the stretch, and they've just been
all right
taking care of it. No, I'm just saying, like, in the sense of like they've been taking care of those teams as opposed to like being like, oh, we have to, still have Embiid out there with 4 minutes left.
Yeah, Denver. I mean, Denver should be like they're the opposite of Denver. Denver's scoring like 140 points a night and losing.
Yeah.
And like they're gonna probably wind up like having a new coach next year and a largely different team because of it. All right, let's keep talking about some of these hot teams and seeing who we trust. Utah, which is, man, like their 92 defensive rating since the All-Star break is mouthwatering.
They're insane.
Their lineup is so good.
I'm sure Houston is going to beat Utah in the playoffs if they see each other. But man, I bet Houston wishes they had an easier first round out.
Yeah, I just came into the office today listening to David Locke, who's the Utah Jazz play-by-play guy and also does his own podcast network. But basically just talking up their defense and claiming like Rudy Gobert is a top 10 player.
Yeah.
And it's not that far out of like the realm of possibility simply because of the impact he's had for this team. Like you look around at what they're doing, like Royce O'Neal is shooting something like 20% from 3 from the break. Ricky Rubio all of a sudden is just like a cog in this offense. And you just look at like what they've been able to do not only on defense, but like just finding the best of some of these just like spare parts to put together enough of an offense.
It's Spursian. Yeah.
And I don't, like you said, I don't know if they can hang with the Rockets. I don't know if they can hang with the Warriors, but it's going to be really fascinating to see like just kind of the chess match between some of these guys.
Yeah, and I think that they are definitely a nothing to lose team, which is, I think they're going to come out and be ferocious against the Rockets. And I also, I mean, the only thing that really Houston has going for them is there's no such thing as the Salt Lake City flu. Like, so
that nightlife,
Yeah. So I think that they'll be fine on the road against Utah. It's also not a hard trip to make. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think that I think that they will lose a game to Utah at least.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think Utah's a year away, and a Rodney Hood, Gordon Hayward guy away from really being a top 4 Western Conference team.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that I think about with them is, okay, so they're good on defense, but what about how reliant they are on offense? And I think too much of the burden, for my taste particularly, falls on Donovan Mitchell still. So I actually went and looked this up, and I think he's had his splits in terms of like the teams he's played against. He's had his worst games in terms of like net rating and all that. And I don't know how much stock you want to put on that against the Rockets. So
interesting.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting, and I'm like, okay, maybe they do something that kind of throws him off or in some way. But at the same time, it just goes back to like you can't really have a rookie leading your offense in the playoffs. Maybe he kind of breaks that conventional thinking, but I that's what I'm worried about the most. I do agree with you though that they'll probably steal a game in Salt Lake for sure.
Yeah, I think what they're doing with Donovan as their number 1 option is probably already in some way unprecedented. I don't have any stats to say that, but like the fact they're at 40 wins right now, they're probably going to push to like 45-ish by the end of the season. I think it would also be completely unprecedented if a rookie led an offense and won a
It
playoff
reminds
series.
me of when Kawhi became what he Kawhi, what was his second season was when he really popped off.
Yeah.
And then by 2011 is when he won the NBA with the finals, or 2012 is when he won the finals.
2011, 2012.
So even there, that's a couple of years. I guess it's like more like Kawhi being in terms of like the same around the same draft pick number, and also like people being like, oh, I didn't know, I had no idea, I had no idea. But Kawhi had brought through an offensive game that I don't think anybody knew he had in his pocket. Whereas Donovan was a pretty high usage guy at Louisville. I just don't think people thought it would necessarily translate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, talking about usage, like I looked this up yesterday just because I was curious, and him and Dennis Smith Jr. are having 2 of the 10 most high usage rookie seasons.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, last year Embiid was in the top 10 too. His high usage, so I mean,
well,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Times.
But if you qualify by minutes, these 2 guys are having the highest usage for a rookie, at least in the top 10 for like all seasons. So I mean, that's pretty interesting, I thought.
I want to wrap up by talking about the Heat,
the hottest team.
the most inscrutable team.
Yeah.
The most inscrutable team. James Johnson scores 39 one night, scores 4 the next. You know what I mean? Or whatever it was the next night. There is a really hilarious blog post about, I think it's on the Heat SB Nation blog today, about how like the Heat's best play is the Kelly Olynyk keeper.
Right.
And there's actually like just some very convincing highlights when you watch them, but it is like watching a moose with its legs tied together roll towards the hoop.
Okay.
I don't know. On any given night, there is one of 9 dudes who could go off or cost them the game.
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to see them in the playoffs.
Nope.
They won like one of the games of the year. I thought was like that game they played the other night where it was like
against the Nuggets.
Which
Double
is in terms
overtime.
of like straight up like methamphetamine basketball. But I don't know what to make of this team. I don't know if I trust them. I don't know if I don't know how I feel about them.
Yeah, and Hassan Whiteside hasn't played in 6 games.
Yeah, Bam is like is Bam like a top 6 pick if you redraft the draft now?
I think I would.
He's up
I
there.
would. Yeah, he's up there. He's making Whiteside kind of like, okay, you're there, you're useful at times, but we can play with Bam too. Obviously he's still young and raw, but he's been impressive.
Yeah, Spo has done a really good job this year in taking advantage of some of these kind of raw, athletic 5'4" types who are probably just as tall as like your wing. And I do wonder, like, next year or 2 years from now, what this team is going to look like, just because him, Justice Winslow, some of the other defensive players that they have here. This season, I remain unconvinced. Just like, it just feels like they've been taking advantage of certain matchups, certain just game plans and advantages in that route. But, like, when it comes down to your horses, like, I just don't see it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're still playing Tyler Johnson too much and all that.
To Chris's point, I think the thing with them is you just don't want to see them because there's always a chance that, like, they could put together four games of, Wayne Ellington, James Johnson, Dragic, and then Wade.
Yeah.
And all have, like, amazing nights, and then you lost the series. I think that's a danger with them.
It's funny you should mention Dwayne Wade. He had some things to say for our boss this week on Twitter, because Bill was talking about how with this increasingly depleted Boston lineup, Boston roster, he is not really excited to see the Heat in the playoffs. I have to assume that all this Kyrie stuff, like, I think we'll see Kyrie in the playoffs, but this is a really banged up Boston team right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got into a dogfight with the Heat.
Yeah.
Like a 6-game fight with them.
Yeah, I don't know who Boston would want to see at this point. I'm a little worried.
Yeah, they're in a
Bucks,
tough
by the
spot.
way. The
Yeah,
answer is
that's
the
it.
Bucks.
Yeah.
For any of the teams in the Eastern Conference playoffs, the answer is the Bucks.
fair.
I don't know if Giannis has rolled his ankle or whatever, but like
Yeah.
even with Giannis right now, they just seem to have forgotten how to play basketball with each other.
He's still so dangerous and so good to me that I just still would not want to have him barreling down like whatever team I'm rooting for.
Well, that'll be exciting to see. We'll
Yeah.
be exciting to see if Giannis can find like this gear to like will the Bucks to any playoff wins. But
Playoff
right now,
Giannis.
it's they're like slated to play against the Raptors. I don't think that they're going to catch the Heat, honestly, the way that things are going. So I think that they're going to wind up playing Toronto, and that's going to be a real test for them. All right, until next week for Paolo and Justin, this is Chris Ryan. Take care.